Hello everyone, in today's video I'm going to be reviewing the movie The Innocents from 1961. The Innocents is a psychological horror film that was made in the UK and distributed by 20th Century Fox in the US. The film was directed by Jack Clayton. He also produced the film. The screenplay was done by William Archibald, if I'm saying his name right, Truman Capito, who was a well-known novelist who did Breakfast at Tiffany's, and John Moore, but he only did certain scenes and certain dialogues in the movie. The movie was based on a horror novel called The Turn of the Shrew by Henry James, which was published in 1886. The movie stars Deborah Kerr, who was a 1940s, 50s, 60s well-known Hollywood big movie star actress who did movies like From Here to Eternity, and Affair to Remember, and The King and I. I'm not gonna lie, I haven't seen The King and I since I was a little kid back in the 90s at my grandmother's house when I was a little kid. Peter Wyngarde, Megs Jenkins, Michael Redgrave, Pamela Franklin, and Martin Stevens. The film was released on December 25th, 1961 on Christmas Day. The movie made $1.2 million at the box office at the time it's released. The plot to The Innocents is about Miss Gibbons takes a job as a governess babysitting two orphans in a Victorian house. She begins to believe a ghosts are haunting the house and that the children's behavior is bizarre because of the supernatural powers and the haunting of the house possessing the children. Last year, you'll remember I did my top 100 favorite movie list series. If I ever had a chance to update that video, I would probably add this movie to the list of my top 100 favorite horror movie list. It surprised me as a horror fan it took me this long to finally see this movie for the very first time this past October for Halloween. As I mentioned in my Wolfman video that I love werewolf story horror movies, I also love ghost stories and horror films. I find them very interesting and fascinating. The movie was very disturbing and creepy. It had a southern gothic atmosphere where it's beautiful on the outside and crumbles on the inside. This movie was one of the rare times it was shot in black and white by Cinemascope. Cinemascope was known for color. It was used back in the 50s for westerns and musicals. The movie has great camera tricks shot in wide and full screen shot tricks. Here's my DVD copy of The Innocents. The Innocents is a ghost movie about ambiguity with no right or wrong answer. It's like The Shining meets The Others. We, the audience, might see this movie a bit different from our different point of views, have a different perspective. This is one of the first early ghost movies to take itself seriously. Prior to this, ghost movies were being played for gimmicks and laughs. With movies like House on Haunted Hill and 13 Ghosts by William Castle are good movies, but were more for laughs than being serious. Then 2 years later, you had The Haunting. The opening shot seeing the main character's hands praying to God, begging God for forgiveness until we are told from her point of view the story through flashbacks. The opening song will stick in your head throughout the entire movie. The hands are a symbol begging for forgiveness. You could also say this movie points out the question on whether or not our kids as innocent as we think we are. We don't always know what goes behind closed doors with kids. But at the same time, kids are kids. They don't always know from right or wrong better sometimes, and they have to learn the hard way. When we were first introduced to Miss Gibbons being interviewed by the uncle as the new governess to take care of his niece and nephew in Bly while he's working, that's the only scene in the movie where we see the uncle. Does he know or not know about the supernatural? Or does he not want to take the responsibility to take care of his niece and nephew and have someone else do the dirty work of raising the children? This is Miss Gibbons' first job ever. At first it seems going well from the start when she's raising the children from the start. It starts off slow and a melodrama. The kids love her like a mother figure. But when strange things are happening, we don't know whether Mrs. Gibbons is seeing things or just going crazy when the children are acting strange, as if they were being possessed by the ghosts that haunt the house. We also see how Miss Gibbons is a little bit curious and being a detective wanting to find out who the ghost is and what happened to the previous governess, Miss Jezzel. and how she died. It's very obvious the character Miss Gibbons is not married, and this is her first glimpse of parenthood. We also get the sense from her that this puts fear into her ever having children of her own. When Miss Gibbons sees the ghost of Quinn on the top of the roof of the mansion, it's similar how like in Vertigo by Alfred Hitchcock, and when she gets on the top of the roof, she finds Miles with the pigeons. One of the biggest themes of this movie is sexual repression. We see how Miss Gibbons cannot control her sexual desires to the ghost of Quint, but she can't have a relationship with Quinn because Quinn is dead. And it's not that Miss Gibbons is a bad person. She admits that she's not perfect. She makes mistakes. She is the highlight of this movie. She steals the show in this movie. In interviews, Deborah Kerr has gone to say this is one of her best personal favorite movie roles. She asked the director Jack Clayton on whether or not does the character Miss Gibbons like really see the ghost or is she going crazy? And Jack Clayton said, "You use your own judgment, decide for yourself." The character Miles, played by Martin Stevens, who you may recognize as the little boy in the Village of the Dam, in that movie plays an evil child. In this movie, he's possessed by the ghost of Quint. When we are first introduced to the character Miles, Miss Gibbons gets a letter from the school that he's been kicked out because of inappropriate behavior. When we see Miles, he's a 10-year-old boy that acts like an adult. At first, Miss Gibbons thinks Miles is a sweet, nice, charming, innocent young boy. When Miles begins acting weird and awkward around Miss Gibbons, we know something is not right. Is it Miles or the ghost of Quint taking over Miles? The scene when Miles kisses Mrs. Gibbons, that scene would not fly today. It shows how when a little boy, knowing from an early age on his sexuality. Sexuality is a normal thing. It's normal to experience a first-time crush with someone older than him, but kissing her was not normal because he's a little boy that was too young for Miss Gibbons. The film hints that Miles caught Miss Jessel and Quint having sex, was curious about what sex was. Like all little kids, that's one of the biggest questions as kids ask parents on what sex is, because they don't really understand what that means. What kids don't understand is that when two people like love each other, that's one way of how like two people that love each other express themselves is by having sex. Miles and his sister Flora have not had puberty yet, and they don't understand like what love and sex means yet. Despite Miss Gibbons knowing it's wrong, but she cannot resist Miles, this is an example of sexual repression. When Miss Gibbons comments on how Miles grew up to be an artist, and Miles responds, "You're being very kind." How many kids talk like that? It's like Miles knew that he cannot be an artist, that he cannot take an encouragement as a compliment from Miss Gibbons. When Miss Gibbons finds Miles on the roof with a pigeon, it's like this is his only friends and his sister because he doesn't have any other friends close to his age because they live out in the middle of nowhere and are isolated. The ending shocked me. I didn't see it coming when Miles said the name Quint out loud so he can go away and get rid of the spirit of Quint that possessed Miles, but sadly, Miles died in the end. You can point out that Miles died of a broken heart or died of shock. I mentioned that Deborah Kerr was the highlight of this film, but I'll admit, the second highlight of this film was Martin Stevens as Miles. He was another one that stole the show in this movie. The sister, her name Flora, sounds like a flower name. She's a very sweet girl, loves tortoises, and has an imagination. How many people name their kids Flora? Flora loves nature and the outdoors. The scene at the lake was crazy. It's like that she knew that she saw the ghost, but thought that Mrs. Gibbons was in denial. This sends Flora into a tantrum, makes her mad and angry, and hates Mrs. Gibbons. This was Pamela Franklin's first movie. For a first movie, I thought she did a pretty good job. I thought both kid actors did a great job in this film. The character Mrs. Groves has been a maid for a long time, understands how hard it is to raise other people's children, and it's definitely been a burnout Mrs. Groves with her line of work. She's a skeptic because it's either she believes or does not believe that ghosts are real. She's afraid to admit because of what something bad will happen to the children, or the family's reputation of a bad scandal. After watching this movie, I watched a documentary about the making of this movie. I thought the narrator gave a good point about how, like, this movie was made around the same time as, like, the Hammer films, when Hammer was doing so well and successful with the films of, like, Frankenstein, Dracula, and The Mummy. And it makes you wonder what could have happened if, like, Hammer had made this movie. Well, if Hammer had made this film, it probably would have been like a blood gore fest ghost movie where the movie does not really need that at all. This movie relies more on like suspense and atmosphere than gore and really does not need that at all. The cinematography in this film is beautiful to look at, thanks to Freddie Francis. It surprised me he did not win an Oscar for his best cinematography work of this film. If you love ghost stories and want to watch a horror movie with no gore or jump scares, but relies on suspense and atmosphere, I definitely recommend checking this movie out. Last year there was a miniseries called The Turning, but was a remake to this movie. I honestly have not seen it, but from what I've heard, it was pretty good. At some time in the near future, I'd like to check that out. I also wonder sometimes if maybe the movie It Follows from 2015 could have had an inspiration for this movie in some ways. Because the girl is the only one who can see like what's there and that no one else can see. Before I end this review, here's a review from my friend, college professor and author, Professor William Burns, on his thoughts on The Innocents.
Hi, everyone. John asked me to say a few words about Jack Clayton's The Innocents. The film, I think, is one of the greatest horror films ever made. It's one of my all-time favorites. I love its eerie cinematography by Freddie Francis and its brilliant script by Truman Capote, who, of course, was adapting Henry James's Turn of the Screw. The first thing that struck me about the film is the title, right? The idea of what is innocence? Is it a state of the body? Is it a state of the mind? Is it a state of being? Is it physical? Is it psychological or spiritual or all these things, right? So, can absolute belief in innocence actually be dangerous, right? We often think about innocence as being pure and good and wholesome, but can an absolute belief in anything actually be dangerous? The film, obviously, in the film, the body is as a site of desire and control in the film, and I think that's represented by the focus on hands. If you notice in the film, hands are a big symbol in the film, and of course, hands reach out, right? They feel something. Hands are a way to interact with reality. It's a connection to reality, right? Because if you touch something, it gives you an actual feeling for it. It gives you a sensual feel. But if you're afraid to feel, if you are afraid to touch, how can you tell if something is real or not? Touching things give you that connection to other people and to reality. And it also comes up in the sense of should these things that we can touch, the sensual things, the body, should it be celebrated or repressed? Right, because Miss Giddens really doesn't have much experience with the world, right? She uses her beliefs rather than her involvement with the world to guide her, right? She is actually the innocent of the actual title, right? She doesn't want to touch things. She doesn't want to reach out to them. She's almost repulsed by the body, by sexuality. I mean, you can see this in sort of her connection with her fixation, actually, on the three male figures in the film, right? The uncle at the beginning of the film who hires her to be the governess, Quint, right? The sort of the game warden, right? Who died, and Miles, right? The little boy that she watches. Obviously, Miss Giddens can't have a relationship with the uncle, right? You can see she's almost starstruck by the uncle. She seems very much wanting to please him. She can't have a relationship with Quint, right? Because Quint, of course, is dead. But she can have a relationship with Miles. And as the film goes on, we see her at times attracted and repulsed by Miles, right? Because, of course, Miles is a boy. He is innocent. He really hasn't grown up yet, gone through puberty yet. He's right on the sort of cusp of that. But Miles has also witnessed sadism and masochistic sexual practices, right? When there's this hint that he observed the sexual relationship between Quint and Miss Jessel, right? But of course, the question becomes, because Miss Giddens is so fixated on Quint and Miles, does she actually want to be the new Miss Jessel and have Miles be Quint in some ways? Right. The other child, Flora, is very interesting too. Obviously, her name invokes flowers and nature. We see her a lot outside in nature, right, in the gardens. And in the film, I think one of the things that Capote does really well with his script is to equate nature and sexuality, right? That just like sort of nature is important, sexuality is important. Sexuality is natural, it's normal, it's life-centered. The children in the garden are innocent, just like Adam and Eve, right? It's Gideon's sexuality, which is unnatural. It's based on ghosts. It's based on death. It's based on corruption, fear, evil. You always see her wearing black and gray, right? Those sort of really, death-like colors. And in some ways, I think that Giddens is projecting her desires and fears onto the two children, right? Sexuality is a threat to Miss Giddens. She feels she can't give in to her desires, right? Because if she gives in to the desires, she loses control. And for her, control is power, right? She very much wants to be in control. And in some ways, I think Giddens is in a state of emotional arrested development, right, where the children are actually developing normally, right, even though they do some weird things, But again, kids do that. They explore the world. They don't know right and wrong right away. They have to learn that. It's Giddens' desires, right, that actually conjure up the ghosts, not the children's, right? It's not the children who even say they see the ghosts, right? No one sees the ghosts except for Miss Giddens, right? So, and of course, there's those great scenes in the film where you're not sure what you're really seeing, right? Freddie Francis is just brilliant. Like that haunting shot of the ghost of Miss Jessel, right? That you see like a figure across the pond or the lake in the reeds. Like that's just a brilliantly haunting shot. So in the end of the film, right, Giddens actually sends Flora away, right? She's driven Flora to the state of hysteria. It's almost like she's getting rid of everybody, all the competition for Miles's attention, right? She's the one who wants Miles's attention. And the setup for the end of the film with her and Miles is so weird. It's almost like they're on a date. It's almost like date night, right? But of course, this becomes death night, right? Unfortunately for Miles, right? Because even though Miss Giddens sets herself up as a savior of the children, she actually destroys the children. She destroys their innocence, both of them, Flora and Miles. Right, and we see this in the struggle to repress and control Miles in the film, right? Her just nagging him, saying, you saw something, right? And of course, this is really the struggle to control and repress herself, right? That in some ways, Miss Giddens has to keep control of herself, but by controlling Miles, she's actually controlling herself too. Right. And in the end, I think that the movie really is about the difference between intentions and consequences. Right. Miss Giddens has good intentions, but the consequences of her repression, of course, destroys both the children. That in some ways, belief and faith can be used to justify even evil. Right. So not just good, but evil as well. So those are my thoughts on The Innocents. Like I said, it's one of my favorite horror films. I think it's one of the greatest horror films ever made, and I never get tired of viewing it.
So that was my review of The Innocents. Hope you liked the video. Please like the video, subscribe, hit the notification bell to get the latest updates on my YouTube channel. See you next time.